Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On Friday, we've avoided yet another day of death, disaster, and destruction, and we are here to take your biblical, theological, and worldview questions. Casual Friday. I happen to be advertising the John Nelson Darby Academy. We were online before it was trending. Why don't you come check us out? jndarbyacademy.org, where we will provide online education for 3rd through the 12th grade with a biblical worldview. And even when the government shuts down the schools for the next 72 years because we might get sniffles, John Nelson Darby is going to be going strong. jndarbyacademy.org. We take your biblical, theological, and worldview questions today. But before we do, let's comment on this advertisement that popped up the other day in Corey's feed, because he visits some of those sites, I guess. Didn't come up in my feed, so I don't know. Where you been going? Where you been looking on the internet? Coming to that Tim Keller stuff. There it is. The Gospel in Life, whoever that is, I'm not sure. Feeling tired, worn down? Sign up and get Tim Keller's free guide on practicing Sabbath. Well, let's consider what's all this about practicing Sabbath. Now, I have no doubt that you, me, everybody else, we from time to time get tired, worn down, sick of the world maybe. And so do we want a free guide to practicing Sabbath? Now, we did not download the free guide, but here on the website is 6 Ways to Practice Sabbath by Tim Keller, written a couple years ago here. And he discusses how in our culture that forces us to overwork, how can we practice Sabbath? This tells you right here. As a matter of fact, just the title of it tells you that Tim Keller and most of the evangelical world don't mind allegorizing and spiritualizing biblical terminology. Sabbath is not really something you practice. Sabbath is a day of the week. Let's all practice Saturday. Can we just practice Saturday together? Well, that's dumb. You don't practice a day. And so clearly he's referring to the rest of the Sabbath, no doubt about it. But actually, even under the days of the law, Sabbath laws were not something to be practiced. You just did them. And they were pretty clear. You didn't really need a Tim Keller book on how to practice it. It was just something, here's what you do on Sabbath, here's what you don't do on Sabbath, and mostly it was a don't do kind of list, and that was it. So Tim Keller has just raised the flag and say, I spiritualize. Now, remember that when you spiritualize, you make up spiritual lies. That's what spiritualization is. It's just, make up. I'm going to twist and pervert the scripture all for the purpose of my clicks on my internet site. That's what spiritualization is. But let's see how to practice Sabbath. He says that I suggest that you be sure to get 6 kinds of Sabbath rest. Now think how, I don't know how many times I'm supposed to use the word stupid in one broadcast, but think how stupid it would be to say, I want you to practice napping. There are 6 kinds of nap rest that you can get. There's the upright nap rest. There's the flat. There's the 45-degree angle rest that you can get. Some of you ought to try, where your head is below. There's that kind of rest. Practice all these kinds of rest. Why is rest all of a sudden so complicated? But here we go. I suggest you get 6 kinds of Sabbath rest. The first kind, he says, is time that is completely unplanned. Okay, I suppose that there are some people who plan every moment of their lives. I don't happen to be one of them. But here at this time, he says, when you have a complete cessation from activity, Let's see, we need this kind of complete cessation. Even our supposed time off will be just another form of tiring exertion. Okay, so you got a day in which you say, I don't have anything planned. That's not really practicing Sabbath, by the way. That's just having a day in which you don't have anything planned. He says, take some avocational time. That is something that is pleasurable for you, but takes some skill and expertise, like maybe growing an African violet. Take some avocational time. Let me say again, that's probably a real nice thing to do. Doesn't have anything to do with Sabbath, but yeah, go for it. Take some contemplative time. I feel better already, don't you? This is a word that every New Age spiritualistic guru like Tim Keller has to use. It's required to use somewhere, is to talk about contemplative. Contemplative. That means close the Bible, just allow the Spirit to ruminate in your soul. Contemplative time. The Bible requires that we observe the Sabbath day with gathered worship. Could you show me that? Could you show me that? Do we have any calls from Tim Keller coming in? No. He's not calling yet, but I'm sure he's going to, because the Bible requires that we observe the Sabbath day with gathered worship. Actually, it doesn't. Actually, I'm pretty sure that you could not find it in there. Actually, I think gathered worship was even not something of the Sabbath. He's thinking like a Presbyterian is the problem, but that's not all we should do. Prayer, solitude, journaling, which is one of the dumbest things in the world that you can do. I don't care if you want to keep a diary of the things you did. Today I had Fruit Loops for breakfast, and then went outside and it was snowing, and I took the dog out for a walk, and you keep that kind of journal if you want. I'm good with that. I turned on the news and found out that the world had gone stark raving mad. Keep a journal if you want. But this idea of spiritual journeying is mysticism, and honestly, I don't think you should do it. I don't care if you keep a diary, like a bank roll or something like that, even of your thoughts and your feelings and, things, I woke up grumpy today or woke up really happy today. That's all fine. But this contemplative idea really is just absolutely ridiculous, honestly, is what it is. But take some contemplative time. I don't know. I like to sit out and look at the stars. If you want to call that contemplative time, okay, do it. Take some aesthetic time. And I think what he means is take a walk. That's a nice thing to do. It's refreshing. You see some beautiful things, go out there, look at a frog jumping on a lily or something like that. It'll refresh you, no doubt about it. I think you should do it. Doesn't have anything to do with Sabbath, but I think you should do it. Take time to nurture some relationships. I don't know how that's Sabbath, anything related. Yeah, of course you should do that. Inject Sabbath into your work. This is because he only had 5 things, and it didn't seem right to say 5 things you can do to fake this whole Sabbath stuff. But number 6, inject Sabbath into your work. Some people are so given to overwork that even regular time off doesn't seem to keep them from being totally exhausted by the intensity of their work week. Associated with the Sabbath laws were the gleaning laws, in which owners of fields were not allowed to harvest the edges of their field. By the way, I don't know that those were associated necessarily, except that they're both in the Torah. But they had to leave a percentage of the grain in the field for the poor to come and take. Some people have used this as an inspiration for deliberately setting fewer goals for themselves in a given day of the week. Not hard. I don't even want to read the rest. What? This is pop psychology. What were you saying over there? So unrelated, exactly. It's it's pop psychology injected with some Old Testament Presbyterianism, because he's Presbyterian, you got to put that in there. Works related. I don't really know anything about the Bible, but I'm going to put all of this. The best thing about Tim Keller is that he's bald. Outside of that, he and I really don't have anything in common. So I think that, you probably run into these kind of things as well, feeling tired and worn down. Well, who's not from time to time? Sign up and get Tim Keller's free guide to practicing Sabbath. Why don't these guys just be honest and say, Tim Keller has a few practical points on refreshing yourself at the end of the week? That would be fine. And even other than it's kind of psychobabble, even the things that he said there, you could take that and you say, oh, that's fine. But there is no need to fake it like this is Sabbath and you're doing something spiritual. You're not. In this thing that he has given here on 6 ways, let me get back to the top of it, 6 ways to practice Sabbath, there is nothing in here that is exclusively biblical nor Christian. The stuff in here is just, you could go anywhere in the world and apply that to anybody in the world under any religion. This is not Christian stuff. Now, does everything in life have to be Christian? You know, how to take a Christian nap, how to have a Christian walk in the woods, no, everything doesn't have to be Christian. But let's just say what it is. This is Tim Keller's ideas on how to refresh yourself. Let's be honest with it. Instead of trying to use the Bible and use religion to sell stuff, honestly, is what they're doing, because that's, at the end, what it comes to, I suppose. Well, welcome to Ask the Theologian today. Ready for your questions now. Biblical, theological, worldview questions. I hope you'll go to John Nelson Darby. Check out the John Nelson Darby Academy. And we would love to visit with you, your children, your grandchildren, your neighbor kids, whoever it is. Maybe over these next, is it 72 weeks or 120 weeks that governments are going to close down their school systems because they're scared of the sniffles. Maybe in this time, you're going to find that neighbor kid who's typically at school is utterly annoying. And you're going to think, I can't handle this. And you might say, you know what? I have heard that tuition at the John Nelson Darby Academy is only $100 a month. I'll pay it. And you'll walk over to your neighbor's house. You'll say, John Nelson Darby Academy, they can get your kid back in school. I'll pay the tuition. Trust me, it's good to practice my Sabbath rest. And you'll put that annoying little neighbor kid in school. Just a thought, just an idea. Rick had a question yesterday. Sorry, Rick, that I missed your question yesterday. It says, I've been studying Romans 5-8, and many teach that the believer has 2 natures. I've found a few who teach one nature. What do you believe the Bible teaches on this matter? # bald theology. Well, we talked about this in a related but different question the other day when we talked about the body, soul, and spirit. And my thinking there was, there's the mental part of the person, there's the physical part of the person, there's the spiritual part of the person, and yet really there's just the person. So in this idea of 2 natures, you have the fleshly nature or the spiritual nature, and some who do teach 2 natures, I think, separate these things out too much. For example, someone from the holiness movement might say that you totally conquer the fleshly nature in order to allow the spiritual nature to totally control your life. I don't think you can separate those 2 natures that way. So I think we've got 2 roads at which we could go, 2 dispositions, if you will. And maybe you could even say there are 2 natures within us, but I don't think there's anything that we can ever split here. There are others like the Calvinists, for example, who would say you had your old nature, your sinful nature, until you became a new creature, and now you don't have that old nature anymore. You have this new nature. even though they still struggle with that old nature. So I think even if there are two natures, it's impossible to separate them. And therefore, why should we analyze it too closely? I think that Randy White is Randy White as a whole. His thinking, his being, his spirituality, his decision-making, the things that, all of that is the whole package, and you can't really just take one part of me, nor could I of you. We're individuals, we're people, we're a whole. So, do I have, and you have, and we have, a nature that wants to go and just focus completely physical, or a nature that wants to go and focus on those things which are spiritual and eternal? Yes. And we struggle with that. Maybe we could call that our conscience, our focus, whatever it is. So I think there's the natural man, and that is certainly a phrase that Paul uses, for example, we can see it, we'll go to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, where it speaks about the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God. Now, let's look here, and the word is physikos. That is the physical. The physical man doesn't receive the things of the Spirit of God. They're foolishness unto him. Neither can he receive them, because they are spiritually discerned. But he that is spiritual, pneumikos, judgeth all things. Now, the truth is that is me and that is you. The natural, the physical. If I'm completely focused on the natural, I will reject the spiritual. This is what Thomas Jefferson did in the Jefferson Bible. He took the spiritual, took his scissors and cut it all out of there and had the Jefferson Bible. It was a naturalistic view of everything in the Bible, and Thomas Jefferson rejected the spiritual. Now, did Thomas Jefferson have a spiritual man? Was there a spiritual side of him? Yes, but he wouldn't allow it to live. He wouldn't allow it to thrive. He wouldn't allow it to prosper. He wouldn't allow it to think. Because he was a thinker. I think I would have liked Thomas Jefferson in so many ways. I probably would have liked the politics of John Adams better than Thomas Jefferson. But nonetheless, I think he was a fascinating fellow. I've been to his home, Monticello, and seen some of the things, and read some of his works and all that kind of stuff. But he didn't want to deal with the spiritual. So I really am going to say that we deal with people, not with natures. And therefore, I deal with Rick, I deal with Manuel, I deal with Roger, I deal with Randy. And we have this spiritual side of us and this spiritual aspect of us, and it just depends on what we're going to bring about through all that. Okay, thank you for that. Manuel had a question. I think this one was also yesterday. I'm not sure. Manuel in San Antonio. How do you explain Hebrews 8:4? It sounds to me like the law will continue in Daniel's 70th week. As a matter of fact, we got a couple of questions today I noticed about Hebrews. So let's start here in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 4, which says, "For if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law." Now, some of you are saying, okay, how does that relate? First of all, and this goes to our next question as well, if you apply the book of Hebrews to the time of the tribulation, Daniel's 70th week, and you understand that in Daniel's 70th week, there are sacrifices that are being made, well, then you have to have the priesthood under the old law, because that's how the sacrifices were brought, and this is the connection that is made there. Now, I do agree with you, Manuel, that the law will continue in Daniel's 70th week. I think that the law currently is put on hold. And so what you have in this situation is that our mystery age in which we live actually interrupted the law. And the law itself has 70 weeks which are decreed for Israel, for the nation of Israel, for the people, for the holy city. And that just has not been accomplished to the full. So this age is removed and the law begins. Now, sometimes dispensationalists, they teach that a dispensation begins after a judgment is given. So the previous dispensation, they would say, let's say, for example, the dispensation of conscience. The dispensation of conscience ended with the judgment of the flood. There was that crisis or judgment, and then you enter into the dispensation of government. The dispensation of government, they would say, ended in a catastrophe, and that judgment, that time of crisis, was the Tower of Babel, and they'll put one of these judgments between each one. Now, the problem is that when you come to the transition between grace, between the law and grace, you really don't have one of these judgments to go by. There is no crisis there. And so they stumble around and they say, well, it's, Christ's death upon the cross. That's what it was. But that is not anything like the other judgments upon the men that are there. Now, I think the reason that we don't find the judgment there is because it's not there. Because the age of the law never ended, it was just paused. It was paused with this insertion of the age of grace, and it is going to pick up again for the final 70th week. So I do think that you're exactly right when you say it seems to me that the law will continue into Daniel's 70th week. I think that you are exactly right there. Thank you, Manuel, in San Antonio. I appreciate that. And now a related question that comes from Roger in California. It says in the book of Hebrews, in which you called in your series, The Last Call for the Kingdom, the term last days used in chapter 1, verse 2. Should we apply that term? The question is, should we apply that term only to the leading up of 70 AD and not to today? Could it also be applied to the coming tribulation? Is the opening of the seven seals, for example, God speaking through his Son? Let's go to Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. God, who at sundry times and diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds. Now, these last days, the word last here is the word eschatos. We get, of course, eschatology, the study of last days. Now, here it does specifically say that he spoke in these last days. The eschatos, or the eschaton, does not have to be the end of the world, as you know, but it could be, we could even say, well, in these last days, there has been a tremendous fear generated by the media and government officials over coronavirus. And that's true. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the last days, but it does have to do with these last days. Now, in light of that, of course, Roger says, could it be that we could apply them not only to these last days in which the writer of the Hebrews spoke, which is leading up to AD 70, could it also be applied to the tribulation? I think that the short answer is yes. The long answer is be careful. Here's the short answer. That the Hebrew scriptures, and I would associate the book of Hebrews with the Hebrew scriptures. That is to say, let's say the Old Testament. The Jewish people very much understood, and I think they're right, understood that books like Joshua or what we would call 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel, these are history books in a sort. They viewed those books as prophetic. Prophetic because what they said is, what the children of Israel were going through at that time actually is a picture of what is going to come in the future. I based, by the way, a lot of my interpretation of the book of Job on that very concept, that Job was a real man, a historical figure, going through all the troubles that he did, but that was a picture of what was going to happen to the nation of Israel in the future. Now, could the book of Hebrews be that way? In that case, what the book of Hebrews is primarily about, or its first application, has to do with the destruction of Israel and how the destruction of Jerusalem and how the nation of Israel should respond to that. To the approaching destruction. Now, can you almost just pick that up and lay it over on top of the days of the tribulation and the approaching judgment of God, if you will, and Armageddon and all those kind of things? I think that you can. And therefore, you'd almost see the book of Hebrews in a different light, and probably is, like so many other books of the Bible, worthy of going through twice, once looking at it in AD 70, once looking at it from the standpoint of an end times post-grace view, and seeing it after the rapture, and how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation. And it's a very law-based book, as Manuel says, and the book of Hebrews, that is. And so the law is applying once again, and it does carry over. Now, I think you'd find great insight going both of those directions. I think the one area which you should avoid, which is what unfortunately most Christian teachers do with the book of Hebrews, is they apply it to this age of grace rather than the previous or forthcoming ages of the law and the destruction that is coming there. Therefore, they take the book of Hebrews to be about the Christian life and about the threat of judgment, to standing before the throne of God and receiving a sentence of hell, and they get falling from salvation and works-based salvation and everything else because they're applying it to the wrong dispensation. Excellent thought there and insight. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. By the way, today's the last day for the great price on this book. And that is the life story of C.I. Scofield, only $6.50 when you use coupon code Wednesday. And tell you what, while I'm selling things, maybe I should also tell you that we've got the new African violet mugs, right? It says you don't need a reason to live, you need an African violet. And if you want one of those mugs or one of the other mugs, go to our website, dispensationalpublishing.com. I just searched mugs, and I found, there we go, the choice of 2 mugs. There you go. There's all 3 of the mugs that are shown there. The Question the Assumptions mug, the Ask Me About Dispensationalism mug, or the Reason to Live mug. You can mix or match. Pick what you want, put them in there. $24 actually includes postage on that. So they're basically $12 a piece. Postage is kind of high on getting those things to you, unfortunately. But go check those things out. There's some, by the way, I should say, while I'm selling stuff here too, in the shop. Let's see what the best way to get there. Just click the shop button and then go to on sale, because there's some things on sale also. You click that button right there, and look, there's some new things right there. Giant size or personal size giant print. What in the world does personal size giant print mean? It means that, I think I've got one right here. That's what it means. It means I don't have to get a wheelbarrow to carry it. It's not a Schofield. It's just the Bible does have some references in it. It's bonded leather with gold-gilded edges. Nice little Bible. And it's on sale for what? Less than $24. The Reese Chronological Study Bible. I just came across this recently, and I like it. And if you're looking for a chronological study Bible, this puts everything in order of how it happened. Nobody no two theologians agree completely on how chronology should be, so you have to question the assumptions on it. But Mr. Reese was a dispensationalist, so check that out. And there's some other sale things there. Oh, there's a large print hardcover Schofield Bible, and just a lot of good stuff there on sale. You can check that out. And read a book while you're recovering from coronavirus. It'll all be good. Let's take, speaking of the virus, here's a question from, well, I lost the question here. Where are we? I had a question from Greg. And the question is, I'm going to find it here. Okay. So, Greg, your question had to do with the coronavirus. I know that. And somehow I've made your question just go away. But the question was about the creation of the coronavirus anyway, and how, oh, there we go. Do you think that this manufactured virus is in retaliation for Trump's tariffs on China, and who might have been the vector to carry this virus to world leaders? It takes, you have an assumption there, of course, that the virus is manufactured. There is some evidence for that. I don't know that there's any proof for that. Probably won't be any proof for that. But there certainly is evidence that it was a manufactured virus. It seemed to have a very localized creation, and it just so happens that that creation has one of these laboratories, and it would be you'd be way too gullible not to question whether or not it's manufactured. So I don't know that I would necessarily say it is manufactured, but I think there's enough evidence that we should be suspicious that it's manufactured. So I'll go with that. We've got a manufactured virus. And the question is it in retaliation for Trump's tariffs on China? Maybe. I still think, and even this morning there were some news articles about how China was saber rattling a little bit about how we're not going to send you any medicine. And we should have been aware that we had a problem there a long time ago. But for whatever reason, we weren't aware or we didn't care. Certainly, somebody was aware and somebody didn't care. I don't think we, the people, were aware that China has all our medicine. But even at that, you know, they're saber rattling. I don't think they'll come to do anything. And the reason is we do still have a bigger button. And that is that, it's kind of twofold. One is, we buy so much stuff from them, and they are so dependent upon U.S. dollars. I don't think they want to get in a trade war, but they do want to sound strong. They do want to save face. I wouldn't be surprised. I may be wrong on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if what's his name in China? The Chinese premier, let's call him that. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese premier doesn't send a little secret message over to Trump saying, "Hey, I'm gonna say a bunch of bad stuff today. Just ignore it. I don't really mean it." There's lots of behind the scenes stuff going on there, but he needs to look good for his people. He needs to look tough and all that kind of stuff. So maybe there's some of that going on. Maybe they're just dumb enough to say, "Oh yeah, we'll do this." In which case, then I think we have a military and we have advanced capabilities. And the truth is, and some people have written about this, that the Chinese government, the Chinese economy is not very good at inventing stuff itself. It steals stuff. And I think those of you in North Carolina a few years ago maybe created this virus, and there's some Chinese involved in it that got over there. I read an article anyway on it that was kind of intriguing. And so it probably is a stolen virus that we created, and they borrowed the formula, the recipe. We're not very good at keeping our secrets secret, and they're very good at stealing secrets. This is kind of what the Chinese do. And the problem with this is I don't know that their own research and development can sustain them into the future. They as an economy have to keep stealing stuff. And they can manufacture it. They're very good at manufacturing it, at improving it, at making it, cheap and all that kind of stuff. But they can't come up with it. Probably just because they don't put in the efforts into research and development like we do in the United States or Israel does. So maybe, again, how all that came about, I don't know. I doubt anybody knows. I don't even know if the President of the United States knows. Maybe he does. In fact, Scott gives a good word here. The virus may have been manufactured, but I doubt it was intentionally released. Scott says the economy of China is now set back 10 years. Maybe it'll never again equal to what it once was. Manufacturing of everything is moving out of China now. Yeah, it certainly was not a good strategic move if they did it intentionally. Now, they might have done it intentionally, but I think that there's some oddity going on there. Now, who is the vector to carry the virus to world leaders? Have you been to China recently? Okay. I'm sorry? Whitney. My daughter-in-law, she went to China about 3 years ago. She teaches Chinese students online. Maybe that's it. Somehow it came through. I don't know. It'd be interesting. And, here's the one thing I would say. As all of you know, I have been and remain skeptical about I'll say draconian measures that we have taken to respond to this virus. I think it's overkill. All of the information that I see about what this virus does tells me the measures that we're taking, which literally are trillions and probably hundreds of trillions of dollars that we have cost ourselves, our own economy. And don't be mistaken, this is regular guys like me and you. Every one of us has been affected by this financially. And it's because of the measures we're taking. It seems like our response has been way overboard, like a universe overboard for what the potential of the disease is. Now, I have to say, either this is a test case just to see how much they can control us using fear, or this is just the natural human spirit that always wants to hide under the bed anyway, and it's just a display of all that. The one other possibility that I haven't talked about much, but the other possibility is that that our government officials know more than they're telling us. If that's true, by the way, I give no pass to President Trump, whom I've been a very big supporter of. If he knows that what we are experiencing is biological warfare, and he knows that it really is a civilization-threatening kind of deal, he has an obligation to tell us. And if he doesn't tell us, I would join Nancy Pelosi in joining an impeachment. She wants to impeach him because his hair is too long. I think that's an impeachable offense. If he knows that we're under biological warfare and he doesn't tell us, to me, that's equivalent to El Paso was attacked by a nuclear weapon, but they covered it up and didn't say anything. You can't do that. This is an open democracy. You've got to tell. Now, again, I don't have any reason to believe that he's not telling us, but I would like to know if there is something out there that we ought to prepare. You know, I say as a pastor all the time, this is a little different for a president, but I say as a pastor, trust the Lord and tell the people. Just put it out there. Here's what you're dealing with. Here's what you've got. And either they're lying to us and saying, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing. All the while, I heard Congress today, by the end of this, Congress itself may put out $500 billion over this thing. $500 billion for something that's got a 1% death rate? That doesn't make sense. Something here is not adding up. Now, is it utter fear and stupidity? If so, then don't spend the $500 billion. I want to know, why is there not a single congressman or senator that I've heard so far that says, even on the last $8 billion package, why isn't there that I've heard a single congressman or senator standing up and saying there is no need for us to spend $8 billion on something that 80% of the people who get it will not even know they have? There is no need for everybody in America to be tested to find out they have something that wasn't going to do anything to them. Something there doesn't line up. I don't know what it is that doesn't line up. And again, I'm thinking it's just the human spirit gets afraid. And the human spirit is afraid of the boogeyman. And we want to do something to stop the boogeyman and to put it out there. And so we'll put $8 billion, even if it's $8 billion down the toilet, and we could have used it for toilet paper. It doesn't have to make sense. It's irrational. But I tell you what worries me more, and I wrote about this a little bit yesterday on Facebook. What worries me more is that basically we have proven that we do not have a constitution. We can declare a health emergency and set the Constitution aside. Now, I think somebody ought to press the issue on this. I think there ought to be some Supreme Court cases over some of the things that are being done, like, for example, all across America, the prohibition of peaceably assembling if you do it more than 100 people or more than 250 people. That right, constitutional right, has been removed. Somebody take that to the Supreme Court. I think it's worthy. You say, don't waste their time with that. It's a health emergency. It's a health emergency. I don't trust government officials beyond where my nose goes to not misuse a health emergency in order to take away people's constitutional rights. I think that we have a constitutional right to gather together in large crowds and spread the coronavirus if we want to. The government cannot take that away from us. Somebody needs to take this to the Supreme Court and deal with it. Now, you say, okay, Randy White, you're just stupid. Maybe I am, and maybe I'll get coronavirus. Maybe I'll die from it. I don't know. I'm going to die from something, but I'll have an African violet by my side, and it's all going to be good. But I tell you what, I think that we ought to be standing for our Constitution in this, and we ought to be saying, listen, governors, you do not take our constitutional rights because somebody's afraid of getting a cold. You cannot do it. It is utterly illegal to do it. But nobody's standing up and doing it. Say, oh yeah, health emergency, set aside the Constitution, bring in the dictators. Come on, let's do it. And this is frightening how quickly we will give up our constitutional rights because we're scared. I don't think we ought to do it. I think that, the gun control advocates, they don't want to give up an inch. I'm one of them. They don't want to give up an inch. That's good. And they're wise in doing so because they know it's an attack on their constitutional freedoms. Well, I think just the same, those who believe in the right of public assembly should not give up an inch. I don't think that the government can tell us that we can't have 152 million people gather together in one place, regardless of how dangerous it might be. We have the right to do it. And I think some of these churches ought to, by the way, I think at least in New Mexico, and I don't know about in other states, there's an exception for places of worship. But I think churches should test it. I think churches should not be wimps like Joel Osteen. He was a wimp from the day he was born. But I think that they ought to test it and say, come on in here, bring the National Guard, arrest us if you want. Put me. I'd take it. Only problem is it'd be quite the Sunday if we beat the governess's prohibitions. But do it. Put it to the test, because I don't think it meets constitutional muster. If it does, then we have a constitution that can be set aside for a health emergency. I heard today that Montana, the governor of Montana, he's a Democrat, isn't he? Which is so strange to me. What's up with you in Montana? You've never had a Democrat. You don't think Democrat. What's up? I don't get it. But anyway, you got this Democratic governor up in Montana, and there are no cases, if I understand correctly, no cases of COVID-19 in Montana, and the governor has declared a state of health emergency. Now, why do you do that? He does it, I'm sure, chiefly because it means two things. One, I can get some money that I wouldn't otherwise get. Two, I can have some powers that I wouldn't otherwise have. Now think about this. The governor of Montana, I'm sure he's a nice guy, half idiot, but I'm sure he's a nice guy, because everybody in Montana is a nice guy. So he declares a health emergency. What's he have to do? Does he have to go to the Supreme Court of Montana and present his case and they give a judgment on it? Nope. Does he have to, call up his secretary and say, hey, what do you think? Nope. Does he have to meet together with his cabinet? Nope. Does he have to call together the state legislature? Nope. He just has to say, I hereby declare a health emergency. Heard somebody sneeze over there. Health emergency. Now I have powers I once did not have. I think we have revealed a fundamental flaw in the way we do business constitutionally, and somebody needs to check that. Now, in addition, how did that come from? Who brought it from China? In addition, I might also say that the other fundamental flaw that has at least now been made public is this supply chain of our medicine. It makes no sense at all that we don't make that which is essential for the well-being of our country. And that would be guns, ammunition, and medicines. Why don't we make that here? And I would say the food supply as well, although I doubt is much of a problem unless you're talking avocados. Let's move on here. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 16. A question from Michael. Does Ephesians 2:16 show that both Jews and Gentiles are all of one body, and therefore we inherit the same things? So Ephesians 2:16, that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby. Okay, I think that the answer is yes and no. The question, once again, does this show that both Jews and Gentiles are one body? Yes, it does. Does it show, therefore, that we inherit all the same things? No, it doesn't. I think that's a non sequitur. It does not follow. So, are we one body? Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think you could make a good argument to say that the body of Christ is this new creature that we have become. So there is a totally new thing. This totally new body, it is not that there was a body and Gentiles were brought into that body. Rather, there is one body, which is a new body now. And so this is a new thing. So there's no inheritance at all of this new body. It didn't bring along the inheritance of the Jews because this body is not Jewish. Therefore, it does not have that inheritance. This body is not Gentile, and therefore it doesn't have whatever Gentiles might have brought into the equation in the body. So this is not a child of Judaism and Gentilism coming together, and their child is this new body that inherits Judaism and inherits Gentilism. That we're not talking about a child. We're talking about a totally new thing, completely separate. Therefore, I think it does not have the inheritance of Israel. I think the inheritance of Israel has to go to the descendants of Abraham, through Isaac and Jacob, because there are promises there that are given and must be fulfilled. Those promises to Abraham. Scott in Texas, could you give us a definition of mysticism? I tell you what, just for fun, let's search this here on DuckDuckGo. Let's say, what is mysticism? And see what it has to say here. Let's go to Wikipedia and see. It says mysticism. Let me get where you can see that. Mysticism is the practice in religious ecstasies. That's a Greek word, out of a standing. Alternate conscience. There we go. It's a practice of religious ecstasies together with whatever ideologies, ethics, rites, myths, legends, and magic may be related to them. It may also refer to the attainment of insight in ultimate or hidden truths and to human transformation supported by various practices and experiences. Whew, that's a mouthful. I think they're fairly accurate on it. That is mysticism. It is this ecstatic experience. That is, it's unrelated to who I am as a me. It is receiving these revelations and having these experiences outside of body, if you will. Though most mystical experiences today wouldn't necessarily be totally out of body, but it's not a physical experience. Let's see. Let's look down to Christian mysticism. There a lot of interesting things we could read here. Let's jump to Western esotericism and modern spirituality. Many Western esoteric traditions and elements of popular spirituality have been regarded as mysticism, such as, and there's a bunch of them there, modern Western spirituality and transpersonal psychology combine Western psychotherapeutic practices with religious practices like meditation to attain a lasting transformation. Nature mysticism is an intense experience of unification with nature or the cosmic totality, which was popular with Roman writers. It would be very interesting, I think, to go through some of this mysticism in Orthodox Christianity, in early Christianity, and put this. Let's also look real quick here to Christian mysticism and see what it has to say. Refers to the mystical practices and theory within Christianity, not so much a doctrine as a method of thought. It has been connected to mystical theology, especially in the Roman Catholic and Orthodox Christianity, Eastern and Oriental. The attributes and means by which Christian mysticism is studied and practiced are varied. They range from ecstatic visions to the soul's mystical union with God to simple prayerful contemplation of the Holy Scripture. And it gives an example of Lectio Divina, which I think is a great example of Christian mysticism. Let's go to this again. This is a Catholic divine reading, Lectio Divina. It's Catholic mysticism that Tim Keller, Russell Moore, Beth Moore, unrelated, but you need less of both of them. that they promote and bring into college students, especially in Catholicism. Lectio Divina is a traditional monastic practice of scriptural reading, meditation, and prayer intended to promote communion with God and to increase the knowledge of God's will. In the view of one commentator, it does not treat scripture as text to be studied, but as the living word. You can read the article there about Lectio Divina and see. And it is a contemplative reading of the word. Now, the definition of mysticism, the problem with that is, as you have seen here, that it's mystical. You can't really get a handle on it. But I think this is a good example. The reading of God's word in order to get something mystically out of it rather than mentally out of it. That's mysticism. Prayer, rather than going to God and laying down your request in order to receive something from God, prayer in order to go and have infused in you some spiritual insight and spiritual vigor, that is mysticism. I saw something Tom Rainer put out the other day about creating energy in worship services. That is mysticism. That is different than saying, let's sing a song of praise to God. Let's open the word and see what it has. Rather, it's let's create energy. What do we need to do to create energy? So all of these things about energy, about receiving knowledge, about receiving strength, coming to the word. There's an old hymn that I really kind of like the hymn, actually. I like the tune of it. I like the way it goes. It says, break thou the bread of life, dear Lord, to me, as thou didst break the loaves beyond the sea, beside the sea. And then it says, beyond the sacred page, we seek thee, Lord. My spirit pants for thee, O living word. Remember that? I'll try to sing it to you, but I'm trying to remember how it goes. Beyond the sacred page, we seek thee. That's a mystical statement. That I know the black and white. I get that. But I want you, God. My spirit pants for thee. Now, there obviously is a sense in which we don't want to just read the Bible academically. But that moves very quickly into, I want to have an ecstatic experience, an out-of-body experience, a mystical experience. So that kind of thing where you get away from exegesis, you get away from prayer as laying your requests before God, you get away from the worship experience as an opportunity for people to express their gratitude to God and learn of the greatness of God and God's plan in their life. And now worship becomes as some way in which you receive some sort of booster shot that you go and now you can take on the world. All of that really is mysticism. We see it especially in prayer and in worship and in the quiet time. I don't recommend a quiet time. I think you ought to have daily Bible study time, but I don't recommend a quiet time. That in itself is mystical. So I don't know that I have such a good definition. We probably ought to work on what a definition is so that we could analyze it a little more. But hopefully that is helpful to you. Rick out in California, do you believe that the government is using the coronavirus scare as a test to see how quickly and how much control they can have over a virus that's doing far less damage than the flu? This probably came in before my last rant on the issue. The best I can come up with, yes, that's what they're doing. Again, the unknown is, do they know something we don't know? In which case, those scoundrels better tell us now. If we've been attacked and we got something far worse than coronavirus, tell us. If it's true that there is this virus that I heard today, by May, everybody in the United States will have it. So I think you just ought to assume you're going to get coronavirus. I mean, that's kind of what they're telling us. It's going to go explosive like this. I don't know why they say that, because that didn't happen in China, unless China's lying to us. I mean, it's hard telling what's happening in China, but it seemed like it, came here and it peaked and it went away. And that's more what happens. But let's take worst case scenario. You have it. So I heard this morning that, everybody in America is going to get it. But then they said 80% of Americans won't know they have it. Okay, well, and then of the 20% that do know they have it, the vast majority of them don't even need to go to the doctor. They need to take a weekend off. And a very few people are going to get sicker from it. It's not the coronavirus that's going to kill them. It is just like weaker people die from all the other things. It's a domino effect. One thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And even if you stop the first thing, the others were teetering there, and something else would have come. Literally, the rhinovirus, a common cold, could have come and knocked it into all of those things. So that's there is a certain portion of the population, and all of us probably will get there sometime, unless we're blessed to die quickly. All of us will probably get there, and that is a point at which you're vulnerable anyway, vulnerable to so many things. We all know that. This is what we call life. So here's something that just doesn't appear to be that dangerous. Either it's a test. I don't know. I don't trust government, as you know, but I also don't trust them to have any degree of ability to work together. And so can they really get together and say, hey, we're going to test it. We're going to test. We're going to figure out. But flip side of that is, I don't know that it takes very many people to do that. I suppose the president of the United States could do it. He doesn't even have to tell anyone. Just say, I'm going to see if I can scare him. I think that a guy like George Soros could do it, because I think he holds media people in his hand. And I think he can tell media mogul number one, hey, this whole coronavirus thing, let's make a big deal of it. And that mogul, he doesn't even have to say, this is puffed. He just has to say to those under him, something up in China, go check it out. Give us a report on China. And then he has to, after they come back and report, has to say, it looks like those are increasing. Let's do another report. And that goes down all the way to where it's, Channel 13 in Albuquerque, KRQE, Albuquerque's Kirky. And the reporter on the street just knows, I've just been given an assignment to go out and talk about coronavirus in New Mexico, which till a few days ago wasn't there. But I'm going to give a report about it. And that brings so one man like a George Soros can bring about that kind of fear. So it might be his test to see how much control he has. Maybe government, I just don't think government's that competent, honestly. Maybe I'm totally wrong on that. But certainly, if it's a test to see how quickly and how much control they can have, we, the people, failed the test. And that should scare we, the people. We, the people, ought to say, we've got to take care of this in a different manner. This is not the way to go. Okay, let's see. Also, Ricky on YouTube, do you believe that, that's the same question. Yesterday, while holding a gospel sign on a street corner for a while, a Seventh-day Adventist came up and said he appreciated my sign, which was Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord Jesus and you'll be saved. He said he was saved by grace through faith. Has that group changed their theology? I thought in the past they would say that, but meant something different. First of all, our commendations to you. Of all the pastors I know, Ricky is the most faithful at street evangelism and at door-to-door witnessing. And this is something I might add that a lot of within the independent fundamentalist circles, which Ricky is a part of, that group, I think, has been better at consistent evangelism probably than any other group of Christians in the United States. The Southern Baptist had a little blip a few years ago where they did it in the faith evangelism program. They come and go on it, but mostly they ain't doing that. And certainly none of the other denominations that I know of, and I've never known even like Calvary Chapel or whatnot to do any kind of evangelism like that. But our independent fundamentalist friends, thank you, Ricky, do that. So here he is holding a sign on a street corner, Acts 16:31. You ought to come on the program sometime. Tell us about some of the conversations you have, because just doing that brings about conversations. Some of them, I'm sure, humorous. Some of them, I'm sure, they're angry. Some of them very fruitful. And there really is some good purpose in doing that. You know, you say, oh, how crazy that is. Well, I guarantee you today at noon down here in the plaza, there's going to be a group of old ladies holding a earth flag because it's Friday and they're saving the earth. If you're passionate about something, get out there and tell people about it. So God bless you. And now to your question, Seventh-day Adventist said he was saved by grace. Again, Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord and you will be saved, you and your house. The Seventh-day Adventist are an anomaly. I had a little question about them last night at the end of our Bible study as well. I think that their founding documents would not be grace at all. Their practice of Sabbatarianism is not grace at all. At one time, they are considered a cult. I've mentioned before, there's a book out there called Four Major Cults. It was out in the 80s because I was assigned it in a class that I had in seminary. And they were considered one of the four major cults in America. Since that time, that book was out by Anthony Holcomb, by the way, who I believe is Fuller Seminary, which is very evangelical. Loosey-goosey is, if you need a definition of evangelical. I have heard that they are changing, that they are becoming more biblical. I hope that that is the case. I probably would, I don't know about that setting, but with the Seventh-day Adventist, I think I would want to say, you need to get into a different church because you're telling me you're saved by grace, but that assembly you're in is not a grace-based assembly. So either you're there as a missionary or you don't understand this whole thing about grace, or you're adding to grace later, because the Seventh-day Adventist view, of course, is that we've got to be Sabbatarians so that the Lord will come back. And Ellen G. White and all the problems that are in there. So I'd want to hear him repudiate that. I'd want to hear the Seventh-day Adventist movement repudiate that. I've got a video somewhere that we actually cut it down just to this piece on our Seventh-day Adventist occult. I get lots of comments on it on YouTube. I don't follow YouTube comments, so I don't know everything that's on there. But just go to YouTube and put Randy White, Seventh-day Adventist. You'll probably find it. Read the comments on there. See what people have to say. I do know that there's enough of them that say, I don't know what I'm talking about. Typically, they came from Seventh-day Adventists, and they would disagree with me on so many things that it's really not worth the our argument that we could have there. But hey, I'll open up the invitation again. I've done before on some other issues. If there is a Seventh-day Adventist out there that knows your Seventh-day Adventist theology and you'd like to come on here for 10 or 15 minutes onto the program live, I will take you. I'd love to talk. We'll be gentlemanly. I'll give you your fair time. Now, I won't just allow you to talk. You will have to answer questions. And you will have to actually answer the question. You can't just come on with talking points, but we are going to talk about some of the founding documents, some of Ellen G. White, some of your issues on Sabbatarianism, whether or not your Sabbatarianism is actually biblical law. You will have to answer some questions, but we'll take it. In fact, we'll have a special broadcast and we'll give the whole hour to it because it's going to take you a while to answer those questions. But I'll be nice. I'll be gentlemanly. And we'll talk about Acts 16:31. How's that? Okay, next question is also from Rick. I recently heard a dispensationalist teach that the he in Daniel 9:27 could be Christ, and the first 3.5 weeks have already taken place during Daniel's 70th week, or the first 3.5 of Daniel's 70th week have taken. Let's look at Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant with the many for a week. Now, the proposition here is, could he be the Christ? Everybody, of course, as you know, takes he as the Antichrist shall confirm the covenant. Before we even dig into this, let me say one thing. The Christ and the Antichrist look an awful lot alike, because the Antichrist is mimicking the Christ. Therefore, it is easy to mistake the two. I think the first horseman of the apocalypse is the Antichrist. Sometimes some people will look at that and say, oh, this looks like the Christ. He's coming in on a white horse, he's brave and strong. It's not the Christ, it's the Antichrist. But let's look at this and see, he shall confirm the covenant. Now, let's back up here to verse 26. After 62 weeks, the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people, he shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof with a flood, and unto the end war, desolations are determined, and he shall confirm the covenant. Now, the problem is, you've got Messiah will be cut off, and you've got the prince that shall come. Now, who is the prince that shall come? I suppose you could try to make an argument that Messiah is the prince that shall come. And so the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city. But then you've got Messiah working against Messiah, and a house divided against itself cannot stand. So that doesn't really work. So you've either got Messiah or you've got the prince. That's the only two people you've got in the context to tie the pronoun to, and he shall confirm. Now, if, let's say we take this to be Messiah and not the prince. So, Messiah shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, Messiah shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, Messiah shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay, so their viewpoint is Messiah is going to come, that Messiah in the middle of the week is going to cause the sacrifice to cease, and Messiah is going to bring up on then the last 3 weeks of the last 3.5 weeks of Daniel's 70th week, or last 3.5 years of the tribulation. I don't see, first of all, it's not the most natural reading of he. In Hebrew, typically you take, if you don't clearly know who the pronoun is, you attach it to the closest thing that's found, and that would be the prince that is to come, who is not the Messiah. As we've already said, that would be a house divided against itself. So you would have to argue why you're skipping over the prince to go back to Messiah with this he. Give me some grammatical evidence that you could testify that that's why. So I think that's a mark against it from the first place. But then Messiah comes and confirms the covenant with many for a week. Well, how does Messiah do that? Does he do it in person? Is this an incarnation prior to the second coming in which Messiah comes to confirm the covenant with the many for a week? Or is that some sort of mystical, spiritual kind of thing, like the Jehovah's Witnesses when Jesus came back in 1914? You just missed it, sorry. And then in the midst of the week, Messiah causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Exactly how does he do that if he's not here? lots of questions. And then I think if you tie that passage together with some other cross-references, and you see that clearly it's the abomination of desolation when you get into chapter 12, you see that, hey, wait a minute, the same person who ceased these offerings appears to be this same he. And seeing if I can find that particular passage here. We're already out of time, so I may not speak to it. But elsewhere in Daniel, maybe it's Daniel 11, maybe it's Daniel 1 through 12. And in the book of Revelation, some other places, you see that sure looks like the Antichrist in those other places. So I think it is yet another case in which here probably a mid-wrath or a pre-wrath, mid-trib adherent is trying to make the scripture support their theology. I think the better approach is to let your theology come out of the scripture, out of a natural reading of the scripture. But if you want to make it fit your theology, guess what you do? You get out the lard and you butter up that pig and you get it all buttered up real good. You push, harder, wee, all the way home. With enough butter and lard, you can get the pig through. That is to say, you can misuse the scripture. And that's what it looks like to me as somebody trying to proof text that. I don't think that's a very natural reading here. Okay, got 2 or 3 more questions here, and we'll let you off for the weekend. Stephen says, can you show us on your computer screen the steps on how to leave a long, detailed question? I'm internet challenged. And you say YouTube and Facebook won't let you ask long questions. That's right, isn't it? So let's, I tell you what, let's just go to randywhiteministries.org. And there, this screen, by the way, does change. When we're live, what we have at the top is right there at the top. And then I would click the date right there. That's always the safest. Just click the date, and that's actually going to take you to the page that we need it to take you to, and it is going to look like this. Now, this is a little bit of a beta page. Sorry, we got some overlap there that shouldn't be there. And then you can go right here. Now, if you're not logged in, it's going to ask a login right here, which you can set up a login one time, and then unless you switch computers, it actually keeps you logged in. And so you can do it, and then you can type, this is my very long question. And you would go, obviously, much longer than that, and then you click the question button right there. And it comes back in blue right there. That can be as long as you want it to be, like you see some of these longer ones. I'm pretty sure up at the beginning we had some fairly long questions that came in. I answered them, so they're not blue anymore. That's why. But some of the questions, anyway, as you can see, there's a decent amount of space there, and you can do that. Or you can also just chat. You know, you can say like, hi, Corey, and click the chat button right there. And like I say, yeah, there we go. Click the chat button, and you have got it. So that's how you make it work. Appreciate that. Computer internet challenged, Stephen. Thank you. I appreciate that. And let's see here. We've got another question. Oops, I already answered that question. Okay. How can I, from Dan on YouTube, how can I make people understand that we are Gentiles? It shouldn't be a hard thing, should it? And yet it is a hard thing. Even last night, I was in Galatians, as you know, chapter 3, and down toward the end, let's see here. verse 13, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law. I didn't go into this too much last night. I did when we were in it in our more verse by verse. Now we're on the overview. But Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law. This is taken always to be us. Now, following the us's and we's through the first person plural, that appears to me to be the Jews, not the Gentiles. But everybody takes that as a Gentile church, new body kind of statement. Christ has redeemed us from the law. But I want you to notice the very next verse says, so he redeemed us from the law, that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles. He redeemed us so that the Gentiles might have the blessing of Abraham. You just have to admit that us and the Gentiles can't be the same. Can you read it? He redeemed us from the law that the blessing of Abraham might come on us. No, they already had the blessing of Abraham. And if you follow meticulously all the way through, what any of Paul's writings for that matter, what you find is those pronouns always lead back to Judaism and separate out the Gentiles, ye Galatians, who are not us. And it's so clear in Scripture. The problem is I have a hard time convincing even my preacher brethren about this because it's so ingrained in their head that every chapter in the book is mine, every promise, every verse, every line, every promise in the book is mine. That's what that little song goes. Every promise in the book is mine, every chapter, every verse, every line. That has been ingrained in their head since they were 4 years old, and they're not willing to question the assumptions. So how can I make people understand that we are Gentiles? Such a simple thing. I'd want to say, well, just tell them we're Gentiles. The problem is, for whatever, they can't get over what they've already been taught. Polly wants a cracker. And it is aiming at that every time you find a passage of Scripture, every time you get an opportunity to bring it up, and you have to slowly cause the foundation to crumble. Someday it'll come down. Someday they'll see it, but on the first time, probably not a chance, unfortunately, through there. Okay, I think we got all your questions today. Do you know it was a year ago Monday? So come back with me and celebrate on Monday. A year ago Monday, we started the daily Ask the Theologian. Prior to that, it had for several years been a weekly program. We started a daily half-hour program a year ago, and still, every day we're with you for a half hour. That's a true statement. We are with you for a half hour every day. And it's a blessing to be with you. And don't forget, we got a special on dispensational publishing, a number of other things. I hope you have a great weekend. Go practice some Sabbath. No, just go take a walk. And enjoy some of the creation out there. Had a little snow at my house this morning, so it must be getting close to spring break. And it is a blessing to have you. Remember, the John Nelson Darby Academy was online even before it was popular. jndarby.org. Check us out. You don't need a reason to live. You need an African violet. God bless you. Have a great day.